No.
Welcome. I'm Jim McKinley. I'm in Seattle, and looking outside, it's a little bit cloudy. I recently flew into Seattle, and as the pilot approached the runway, he let us know it was 62 degrees and a 90% chance of rain for the next 6 months in Seattle was the prediction he gave. Kind of playing off of our reputation, I guess. Still have people coming in. Aaron, our technical support, is managing all of that. So I'm going to get started. Once again, welcome, good morning, good afternoon. And my name is Jim McKinley, and my role with the Encore network includes involvement with our program and engagement committee, as well as co-leading with Clint Wilkins, our intergenerational affinity group, which was one of a number of affinity groups the Encore network has. For those of you who don't know us, the Encore network is a coalition of leaders who champion the civic, social, and economic contributions of people 50 plus by creating community, stimulating learning, and inspiring action to transform the Encore stage of life. The Intergenerational Affinity Group is a self-driven forum of the Encore network and is composed of network members who are dedicated to linking the generations to create a better future for all. Our affinity group is excited to bring this program to you today. Our focus is on presentation by CoGenerate on research that they conducted titled, "What do young leaders want and don't want from older allies?" Our agenda is first we'll hear from Clint Wilkins, and he'll make some context setting remarks about the importance and role of intergenerational work with the Encore network. Then we'll hear from CoGenerate featuring Sarah Gibson and Dillon St. as they present the report findings. We'll take a few questions from the chat, so anytime you'd like, please put your comments and questions in the chat. After that, we're going to put everyone, and we've got a large attendance here, and there's going to be a lot of small groups in breakout rooms for 20 minutes. And we'll wrap up the session with feedback from the small groups and highlight upcoming Encore Network events. Got a few suggestions to make our time together go smoothly. Please mute yourself so background noise doesn't interfere with the ability of everyone to hear. As I noted earlier, you can use the chat at the bottom of your screen to submit questions, and we encourage you to do that during the presentation. The event is being recorded, and we'll send an email to all who registered in a few days with a link to the recording. So, with all that in mind, it gives me great pleasure to turn the program over to Clint Wilkins. Clint, take it away.
I guess I was muted. So, anyway, I'm Clint Wilkins, and along with
Jim, it looks like Clint is.
Am I okay now?
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay, great. Jim and I are co-conveners of the Intergen Affinity Group. And so what exactly do we do? We meet monthly, most often featuring a brief talk from a leader in the intergenerational movement, like today, followed by a discussion, followed further by a call to action. Here are but a few examples of our programming. One of our younger members, Caitlin Cromit, led Young Entrepreneurs in Aging, 4 younger practitioners offering healthcare solutions for older adults. Ellie Katz, founder of the Los Angeles-based Sages and Seekers, described how youth and elders work together on equal footing to implement community-based projects. Jim Eisenberg, the executive director of Grandpas United, reflected on how grandfathers can be change makers, especially in partnering with police associations to mentor young men of color. Elizabeth Fiddler mapped the contours of the emerging intergenerational terrain as the editor of a new book, the Oxford Handbook Companion on Intergenerational Connections. Barbara Shainman, the daughter of Holocaust survivors and a longtime member of Encore Network, gave eloquent testimony on how she helped to spawn thousands of young changemakers in Philadelphia. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Over the course of our 3-year history, it's increasingly clear why and how our Intergen Affinity group has become such an integral part of Encore Network. The journalist Chris Farrell has said it most succinctly: the future of aging is intergenerational. Indeed, the future of change-making is intergenerational. Older persons can't go it alone, and neither can young persons for that matter. We are at our best when we work together. We depend upon one another. It comes as no surprise then that over the past 3 years of our existence, we've seen the term intergenerational seemingly evolve from merely a word, an adjective attached to all kinds of change-making initiatives, to a thing in and of itself. And that's why we as an affinity group so cherish our relationship with CoGenerate, whose mission is bridging generational divides to co-create the future. And that brings me to introducing today's host, Sarah McKinney Gibson, CoGenerate's Director of Storytelling and Media. Drawing on her diverse background as a founder of a company, a CEO, and a consultant with such organizations as Participant Media and the magazine Good, she has played an integral role in the success of CoGenerate, where she brings to life the work of intergenerational changemakers all over the world as only a storyteller can. I had the good fortune of experiencing firsthand the magic of Sarah's work a few years ago, watching her dig into the backstories of the key players in a virtual group mentoring initiative I led out of the mayor's office in San Jose. Then weaving together all of it into a compelling narrative that captured the essence of our work with youth, which became not only the keystone of our promotional efforts, but really brought us together as a team. I can vouch for Sarah's good work. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sarah.
Clint, thank you so much. That's like such a flattering introduction. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I'm so excited to be here with my friend and colleague now, Dillon St. Bernard, who we actually first met through the research we did on this study. And we're so taken by him that we hired him as a consultant to help us with our communication strategy surrounding the release of this report and the event where we shared findings with CoGenerate's followers and members. And Dillon wears many hats. He's the communications director at a nonprofit called Future Coalition. He does a lot of freelance consulting for companies that want his guidance when it comes to strategic communications. And he also is the founder of his own storytelling and media company called DSB. That's really focused on shining a light on voices that may not otherwise be heard. So grateful to have you here today, Dillon, and encourage you all, if you need help, to reach out to him. We'll include his contact information after the fact. I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully it looks nice for you all. Dillon and I are going to kind of tag team this, so I'll pass it to him. And I thought I could just talk a little bit about why we did this research as a way to start. One sec here. So, we know that there's kind of unprecedented age diversity and age segregation in America, and that we're facing huge problems. There's more than probably we can handle to think about in one day. And we really believe we can't solve these as a single generation. We need to work together, as was so beautifully articulated at the beginning of this meeting. In 2022, CoGenerate conducted a quantitative study with NORC at the University of Chicago, and we found that there was huge interest in working together across generations to improve the world. And what we were most surprised by is that the highest interest in what we call cogeneration was among Gen Z and millennials, which is not really what the news would have you believe. And we wanted to go out and understand that a little bit better. So we conducted a qualitative research study where I first did Zoom interviews with 31 young leaders across the country working on a variety of issues. We looked for diversity of all kinds. And then we followed up with 18 of them and brought them to DC for a focus group. And Dillon was there, and he can talk a little bit about what that experience was like. We had a photographer there, and we captured some video as well that we used to help promote the report in the event. People were a wide range of ages. The youngest had just turned 18 when we released the report, and the oldest was 31. And everybody is really like, in the nonprofit or social entrepreneurship space, really committed to working across generations for change. So that is maybe not reflective of the broader population. We did want to speak to people who are excited about working across generation to understand kind of what's working and what is getting in the way of that being more effective. I'm going to pass it to Dillon to talk about what it was like to be part of this study, and then he'll take us through the first two insights that we gleaned after all these conversations. But this is just a quick look at the faces of the people that we spoke with.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah, and great to be here all. Yeah, so I was one of the 31 folks who were interviewed for this study. This included a good chunk of us being in DC and being like a large group kind of meeting table to really discuss what it means to build intentionally, intergenerationally. And then, of course, as Sarah mentioned, it also included some pre-work talking with Sarah about this. So this group is ultimately what decided or kind of landed on some of the key insights, on all the key insights that we're going to review together in just a bit. But just want to go to the next slide around some of the top line that will, again, Sarah and I are going to go through each of these. So you can kind of look at your screen around this 1 through 8, generational conflict, not always, personal connection before collaboration, always, no one wants to be dismissed because of their age, cash over compliments, young leaders aren't afraid to talk about mental health, productive conflict, digital natives have a few models, paying your dues isn't working, and then the future of leadership is co-generational. So again, we're going to go through each of these key insights together, but let's kick off with number 1. So generational conflict, not always. So there is, and this is something that was highlighted throughout our conversation, that there's a deep appreciation for older people who have walked alongside them, explaining mistakes and successes and helping them navigate challenging circumstances with the benefit of this historical context. I work nearly exclusively in intergenerational space, and I've seen this firsthand, that there's always this appreciation of, you've done this before, and that, so much of this work of the future requires us to build together. So, unlike I think some of the media narrative that I think counters generations, I have seen firsthand the power of this work in the conversations we had as a group, and then in my own work. 2, frustration that younger generations are being stereotyped as ungrateful or uninterested in learning from elders. So again, I think unlike the narrative I think is often portrayed, I think a lot of the work that I have done and have seen in this nonprofit space, and this is a subset, this conversation is only a subset of the larger dialogue, because it is a lot with nonprofit young leaders. But I think there always, to me, has been a real interest in the learnings, understanding that there's so much lessons learned to connect with one another. And the third piece to this is that nearly all recalled at least one transformative relationship with an older person who helped establish their appreciation for older generations. I think often, there can be some kind of harmful intergenerational relationships where folks kind of feel taken advantage of. But as some folks highlighted in our conversation as a group, and as I have experienced as well, I think it takes one person to older ally to understand the power of this. I think a lot of my work is in civic engagement, and I this is in the report as a quote somewhere, but I worked with somebody who is like 40 plus, has 40 years on me, and we just really grew a personal and professional relationship because there was a shared commitment that we have to reimagine our future. So I think as we think about this piece around intergenerational mobilizing, I think a lot of this has to be about personal connection. So this is number 2, personal connection before collaboration always. So there's a deep desire to connect on a human level first, stressing the importance of coming from a place of curiosity, being vulnerable, and being authentic, and really centering those personal experiences over facts and opinions. So really starting with this human level. Often when when there is conflict or when we're trying to connect folks across generations, what I do in the space is like have the older allies really think about what they were thinking about when they were 18 or 22. So I think coming from a foundation of let's connect with one another to build a future together. I think on the other side, we can also always think about how we orient us back into where we were when we're talking to that other person. Second piece of this is many talked about identifying shared values and common goals and validating other people's concerns as a way to foster connection. And this is a huge piece, again, what we're naming here is shared values, shared goals, and really building the connection. And then building trust up front is no small task, but it's arguably the most important. So as we are often see is, there has to be a real intentional building up of just getting to know one another to get to know one another. And I think the work can come later. I think that's a theme we see across young people if they're working in peer spaces. But I think it all is very clear when we think about that intergenerationally. It's like can be some tension, there can be some concern across generations. So we really want to be mindful of that piece. So before I pass it to Sarah, because I'm not sure you can see the comments here, but I want to just emphasize that the slides will be sent and that we will link the survey at the end of this conversation. So I'll pass it to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Dillon. Yeah, I'm not looking at the chat, so I appreciate that. I just want to say too, like that building trust piece, I think is so key. We're going to talk about this later, but when conflict does arise, having done that pre-work allows things not to go totally sideways, right? It's like you can come back to that and circle back to those shared values and that trust that's been built. The third insight, no one wants to be dismissed because of their age. I think everyone in this group probably knows what it feels like to feel that ageism at some point in their life. And I think that young people experience this too in a different way. The young leaders that we talk to really want to have their voices heard and their perspectives considered and their value recognized. I think that's honestly, everybody wants that, right? So I think it's just something to be mindful of when you come into intergenerational work, to give everyone space, regardless of how much maybe professional experience they have, to have their perspective considered. And unfortunately, a lot of them shared experiences where they were kind of minimized. People said things like, oh yeah, you'll learn like when you're older, or I used to be that idealistic too, or, name the comment. I'm sure you could use your imagination, but feeling that their perspectives are less valid because they've not been on this planet as long was a common experience. And I think sometimes it's those things are said without much like thought to the impact, but just being really mindful to not say those things because it tends to shut people down. The other thing that's interesting to just keep in mind is that older generations in America are predominantly white and younger generations are increasingly people of color. And so there is this kind of racial element to being overlooked or minimized that you want to be mindful of. The fourth insight, cash over compliments, is just a quick way to basically say that young people, especially leaders, really want tangible support. They need financial support, introductions to investors, opportunities to speak at events where they can further establish their credibility, and then to be fairly compensated for their work. There is this kind of feeling that because they're young, that maybe they'll just be excited to do things for free. And that's really not the case. A lot of them, despite what their social media profiles may lead you to believe, a lot of them are really struggling to keep their initiatives going. And they're kind of given this additional task of having to make it look like they're crushing it on social media, when the reality is that they're really desperate for support and financial resources in order to keep doing the work that they need to do so badly. I'll pass it back to you, Dillon.
Thanks so much. 5, they aren't afraid to talk about mental health. So I think we're seeing this constant headlines around the mental health and anxiety crisis that is hitting young people. And anxiety stems from this constant access to the internet, as this slide names, 24-hour news, social media, and a steady stream of global problems. And then there's this added, as we're talking about, this added pressure of leadership and a fear of being canceled for making mistakes. I think we had an interesting conversation when a few of the 31, several of the 31 were talking about. I think that fear kind of goes both ways around the table. So I think that's an important piece to this as well. And then for those who identify with marginalized or historically excluded communities and spaces, there is a fear of being traumatized or re-traumatized by older adults. And again, there needs to be, as the 31 name, that can express the need for culturally sensitive mental health care in our country to better serve young people. So I think we're seeing a lot of, if you kind of land on TikTok and the Gen Z side of TikTok, I think you kind of see the willingness to talk about anxiety, burnout, mental health. And I think that is an important piece to the puzzle that we're going to continue to see around as Gen Z continues to enter the workforce further. 6, productive conflict. Digital natives have a few models. So it really takes time to learn when to speak up, when to assert boundaries, avoid people pleasing, stop taking things personally, and disagree with damaging relationships. So for my own experiences, I am now 24. I've been in nonprofit spaces full time since I was 19. And I think, this has been a learning on the fly. There is no guidebook, I think, for any of y'all, and it wasn't for me, around like how to do nonprofit or social impact work. And I think, again, a lot of this takes time. And I think that's also the beauty of a lot of my work has been, a lot of my ability to enter new spaces has been the doing and access of adult allies who opened up doors. And I think that has been a huge piece to the puzzle. There are areas of development for them, and there's productive conversation across different differences that require a lot of skill. And then there are many spoke to learning to sit with discomfort, the importance of picking your battles and not shaming or scolding people if they get something wrong. So again, I think we're seeing the model and the importance of these difficult, conversations and relationships. And then we're also seeing the kind of need to reimagine those. But I think they're also, as young people, there's also just a peer-to-peer difficulty to think about those partnerships. And I think we're seeing the same for that also kind of translates into older adult allies. I think there's a kind of a difficulty and a discomfort around just saying something wrong. And I think, again, that is not specific to young people. I think we're seeing that generally speaking around kind of call out culture and et cetera. So I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Thanks, Dillon. I just have to say, this was probably my favorite insight, because I feel like older people often come into intergenerational exchanges wanting to be useful. And this, to me, is a primary way that older adults can be incredibly useful, is modeling what productive conflict looks like. Like, that's exciting to me. So I just want to really like reinforce that this is tricky for, I'm 48. I find this to be still tricky at times, right? But I think it's something that as a skill you continue to hone, and it's a way that you can model really useful disagreement that leads to better outcomes. Paying your dues isn't working was number 7. There's this idea that you know, I think even when I was growing up, there was this idea that like, you know, you get a college education, you work really hard at a company, and you climb the ladder and you have stability and you can buy a house and have a family and live happily ever after. And that's not really working very well in America. And so a lot of the Gen Z and millennial leaders we talked to said, you know, the landscape looks different for us. You know, there's no guarantee that if we do those things that we will be able to afford a middle-class lifestyle. And so at least with the people we spoke to, there was this feeling of like, well, I'm going to find my own path and redefine what success means to me. And I'm not going to kill myself working for a company that isn't actually benefiting me in the ways that maybe it used to. So I think sometimes younger generations are pinned as like, not having maybe a strong of a work ethic. And I think that's a misunderstanding of what's actually going on. It's that they're not seeing the payoff really, or the evidence that working as we worked is going to deliver the same outcome or result. And so I think that's just interesting to keep in mind. Granted, it's probably in part because we talked to social entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders, a lot of them starting their own ventures. So that probably skewed things in this way. But I do think that in general, there's been a lot written about how young people are more into like gig work and trying to kind of chart their own course. The last thing here, I think I spoke to number 2, is just that there's this frustration that they feel when working with older people to kind of maintain status quo. When it's not particularly working well for all Americans. And that also includes a more diverse population, right? Like some of the solutions out there are not serving everybody in a very equitable, successful way. And young people really want to disrupt that and create better solutions. This is the last one. 8 is the future of leadership is CoGenerational. Again, I think there's this impression that young people want to push older people out and kind of be the leaders. And what we heard is that there's a really, really strong desire to co-lead. And this just kind of begs the question of like, you know, how willing are you to share power with younger people? And I think what's going on in the election right now with our 2 candidates, it's very top of mind, right? It's like, what would it look like if they were taking the time to invest and cultivate the next leaders, right? And I think just kind of thinking about that in your own lives, that coming together across different generations and having different perspectives is actually hugely beneficial. And so wherever you see opportunities to co-lead with a young person and have that be like a shared partnership, I get excited thinking about what the future of our country could look like if that became normalized. Like that's exciting to me. And also there's been a lot in the news about what some people call like the brain drain, but it's like there's going to be and continue to be a wave of people retiring and moving out of the workforce. And there's a really strong need to transfer all of their knowledge and expertise and network before they leave, or we're going to be in even more trouble. So I think as opposed to succession planning, I think co-leadership is a beautiful way to start thinking about that transfer of knowledge. All right, Dillon.
Awesome. So as we named at the top of this call, the next thing is doing some breakout rooms. So these are the questions that will be answered together. We'll also put them in the chat so folks have them. And then once we do this, we'll come back together. But the 3 questions are: 1, what stood out or was particularly interesting to you about the 8 key insights from the report? 2, what has gotten in the way for you of more effective or enjoyable intergenerational collaborations? And then 3, what do you want from young people who you are collaborating with? So those are the 3 questions. I'll pass it back to the Encore Network team to get us into some breakout rooms.
Thanks so much, Dillon and Sarah. And Clint, before I turn it to you to pick a question or two out of the chat, Sarah, what would be a call to action of this audience that you would suggest?
Well, I think the most obvious one is that, so we did a kind of follow-up survey with people who had received our communications about the event and the report. And a huge majority, I want to say like 60% of people said that reading this report actually spurred a conversation with someone of a different generation. And we were like, that's exciting, and let's support that effort. So we created a conversation guide to kind of go alongside this report with that in mind. So I think that's the most obvious call to action, is to read the report and go through the conversation guide and find a young person in your life to do that with would be a great thing to take on. And we'll follow up via, I can put it in the chat. There's a link to it, but we can follow up via email, and I'll make sure that you have that.
Perfect. Thank you. Clint, been a few questions in the chat, some of which have been addressed. You want to pick one before we move to the small group? And put yourself off mute.
I'm sorry. I'll take three very quickly, two very quickly, and one is a much longer answer. Someone wants to make sure that the reference to the survey is shared. Another question from Sandy Z, will there be a follow-up session featuring what older leaders look for in younger people? Those are quick questions, and if there's time, there's a longer question.
So Clint, I'll be addressing follow-up survey, and there was a response in the chat to the first question. What's the third one?
Will there be a follow-up session featuring what older leaders look for?
Clint, I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, fine. The other was just sharing reference to the survey itself.
Okay. I think we'll just comment then on the question about a follow-on survey. We have had discussions with CoGenerate about their interest in a follow-on survey about what our older allies looking for, and the discussion has been positive, and the role of the Encore network is also being discussed. So the answer is yes, and I'll leave it at that.
I'll just add, we don't know the timing of it, but there has been some interest from a funder in that work. And it was always our intention to do that kind of complementary study to better understand from the perspective of older people what might be getting in the way of more effective collaboration with young leaders. So I'm really excited to do that work, and we'll share details as we know.
Okay, and yes, the link will show up in the chat and in the follow-on email that we'll send after the meeting. So let's get going on the small group breakouts then. There's going to be 4 people in each group. You're going to have 20 minutes. We'd like you to get started as soon as I signal Aaron to get us started, but get yourself going right away in the group. Very briefly introduce yourselves with your name, where you're from, and any organization affiliation. And then you can use the prompting questions that Dillon highlighted to get your conversation started, or go anywhere the group wants to go, but make sure everybody has a chance for input. It would be great if one person could send me an email with a couple of comments that captures what was discussed in the group. My email will show up in the chat shortly. So your breakout rooms should be ready now, Aaron. Take us away. We'll see you in 20 minutes. So Aaron, the idea is everyone finds their own?
Everybody is assigned a room. If anybody's having trouble finding where the room's located, if it went away on your screen, if you hover over at the bottom of the screen, you'll see 4 boxes towards the right-hand side of the screen that says breakout rooms. If you click there, it'll tell you the room that you're in.
Okay, I don't see it. Let's see. I close the chat.
Oh, let me see if there is a.
I've got the.
Okay, so now wait. Okay, now I see it.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi.
Did
So
you make-
I was in an empty room.
Okay. Well, we don't want that. Let me reassign.
Okay.
Aaron,
Thank
Jim, I'm not seeing mine.
You know what? Jim, switch. Hold on. Switch me to host. Let me see if I can. Okay, I'm gonna reclaim host and then I can assign you.
Okay.